Heidi Huber.
Kind of go back and dial it back a little bit to the woman who just spoke. That's what I have found in the last 3 years of being integrally involved in this political activism in the grassroots. It's, you eventually have to come to the conclusion that you're never going to get done what you want to get done. It's never going to happen as fast as you want it to happen, and it's never going to be exactly like you want it to turn out. But I take a lot of, I guess, comfort in the quote from John Quincy Adams. I don't know if you're familiar with this story. He went from presidency to the U.S. House, and he fought for 14 years. Actually had petitions against him on the floor that prevented him from speaking against slavery. That was his entire mission, was to end slavery in his lifetime. And when someone asked him, why do you continue to do this? You know, there's no way you are going to pull this off. The forces are against you. And his remark was, duty is mine, results are God's. And that's really all you have to hang your hat on at the end of the day, is that you fulfill your duty and then you let the rest fall where it may. My passion, very quickly, once I got into the liberty movement, was education. I believe should be the entire focus of the liberty movement. Our failing education system is why we have a second term of Obama. And if they have their way, Ohio, Texas, and every other, what used to be dedicated red state will be blue. And it is all because of our children are graduating as state citizens. By third grade, they believe they're a global citizen. They know more about Earth Day than President's Day. I don't believe that the Common Core is so much designed to take over the public education. They've already done that. They're coming for us who aren't in the system because they can't have any outliers. That in order to completely accomplish their goal, everybody's got to be in. And whether it's coerced or not, they've got to have everybody. Every child, whether they're homeschooled, private schooled, they're making it so everybody is a part of the collective and there's no way out. I labeled this a Fed-led debt finance education takeover. Common Core began out of the 2009 stimulus package. We had a new president, but in Ohio, interestingly enough, we had a new governor, a complete change of party in all state offices. And Common Core was adopted during Strickland's administration. A little history there. In January, when I first got wind of this, and I work at a private school, not as an educator, but as a financial manager, and I called Debbie Terrahart, our state school president. She is my representative, I presume probably yours, to say, what is going on? You know, thinking she had to be thinking like I was. Not the case. She turns out to be one of the biggest cheerleaders there is for Common Core, and I could not figure it out for the longest time how anybody who supposedly came out of the Tea Party or first instinct was liberty could be on board with this. Anything centrally planned coming from the Potomac, you know, should draw suspicion immediately, regardless of its intention. But then after I watched Kasich embrace Medicare expansion, it all came together. It's because there's federal dollars involved in Common Core. It's nothing but another debt-financed, you know, funding program. Dollars leave our pocket, and they go to the government, and they send it back to us in little packages. Common Core being one of them. In July of 2009, the stimulus package was passed. When it was passed, the education dollars set aside had nothing to do, there was no such thing as Common Core, there was no such thing as race to the top in and of itself. What happened was Arne Duncan of the U.S. Department of Education, the secretary, took it upon himself to legislate how those funds could be used. The U.S. Congress did not do that. They just said it had to be for improving and sustaining sustaining education at the state level. Arne Duncan wrote the Race to the Top competition. Much like, I'm sure, the Obamacare schematic, I'm sure it was just sitting on a shelf somewhere waiting for an opportunity. Well, Crisis 2009 was that opportunity, just like Obamacare. And you will find the more you pull this together in the details, it is the identical schematic of Obamacare. And the way they got this under the radar, besides by design, was all of us who were awake and screaming in 2009 were screaming about Obamacare. All the while this is all being implemented. And they knew that. And it's the exact same schematic for education as Obamacare is for healthcare. Some of the excuses coming out of Columbus, or they call us our misunderstandings, is that Common Core has nothing to do with Race to the Top. That wasn't a requirement. It has everything to do with Race to the Top. Race to the Top was, as a competition, was written to make sure they got their 3 gems that they need for control. You had to adopt Common Core standards, even though they had not been written yet. So this fallacy that this was all about improving Ohio standards couldn't be. They weren't written yet. They adopted them sight unseen. The legislative adoption of a longitudinal student data system, that is just like the healthcare system, a computerized, what they call cradle to career education path for every single student and child in America. What they can do with that information is mind-boggling. And then the third rail was the national assessment. Because they know from No Child Left Behind, every state now is pretty much operating, at least on the public district level, in performance-based education. Outcome-based education is another word for it, which basically means you teach to the test. Because in the end, nothing else matters for the student, the teacher, or the school building. Because the child will be evaluated based on their test scores. Nothing else will matter. There's no objective, nothing subjective. It's all objective based on the test. The teacher is evaluated based on your test score. And the school building gets their funding and their letter grade based on the test score. So this presumption that they're going to do anything beyond that is ridiculous, and they know that. They know that the standard drives the assessment, which drives the curriculum. That's the only way it works. Prior to Race to the Top, though, and somewhat similar to what's going on now in Texas in their attempt to turn Texas blue, the Gates Foundation has been in Ohio for years, working with the Ohio Business Roundtable, Ohio Grantmakers Forum, the Thomas Fordham Institute. They're all players in this philanthropy meets big biz meets fed ed. And everybody is benefiting except children and taxpayers. This whole public-private partnership, if you read that on anything, it's kind of like when 2 years ago when we heard social justice for the first time. It's bad news. Public-private partnerships benefit the bureaucrats and whoever else stands to make money, but the taxpayers pay in the end. The Gates Foundation came in and 3 years prior to that basically started seeding this money into all of these organizations. And they prepared basically it hadn't been named yet, but basically the Common Core standards were put together in a presentation called Beyond Tinkering. And it was presented to Governor Strickland in January of 2009. And it was the recommendations for Ohio education reform. Governor Strickland then legislated that into his 2009 budget. Even though it's a funding bill, he put legislation in there. As well as, they are so ahead of the game. They put it in there that the State Board of Education was required by law to revise the state standards because they knew what was coming. The second part of what Race to the Top wanted to accomplish, and I think the most important part to the feds, is this data system. It collects 400 plus data points and growing. It goes from anything from hair and eye color, which gives us all a little bit of the shapes, to voting status, how many clothes dryers are in your home, how many bathrooms, how many bedrooms, do you have a multi-ethnic marriage in the home, anything imaginable that they think they can use to basically break down that child and manipulate that data. It is out there and it is lawfully collected according to Ohio Revised Code. But we can thank Senator John Houston, then Senator John Houston, now our Secretary of State, for bringing that to us. He was working with the Ohio Grantmakers Forum as well as the state school board. And it's documented in the minutes of the state school board where he had introduced a bill, Senate Bill 180, outlining all of the criteria of this data system collection in preparation for filing first Race to the Top application. In doing so, evidently the House refused to take it into committee, in the Ed Committee. So they basically were looking for a piece of legislation that they knew absolutely positively was going to be passed before the Christmas break of 2009. And they found it in House Bill 290, which was a very generic, all it did was take the concessions, make concessions for ROTC candidates to get out of phys ed of Common Core. So a two-sentence bill became a 5-page bill because once it came over to the Senate on the eve of Christmas break of 2009, John Houston cut and pasted his 180 into it, marked it as an emergency order because they couldn't afford to have the 90-day lag between what happens when once the governor signs a bill, there's a 90-day grace period of when that bill is not in effect. They had to have that legislated before they could, in order to make that deadline of January 19th. It passed through the General Assembly hours after it passed out of the Senate floor. Everybody went home for Christmas. It received no discussion. It received no committee discussion. You ask people, members of the House now who voted on it, who are conservatives, what was the story on this bill? This bill never came up for discussion. We voted on it, we went home. Just exactly like by design. It resulted in a lot of Ohio Revised Code, but in particular is 3301.94, which states the agreements may permit the disclosure of personally identifiable student information to the entity named in the agreement, provided that disclosure complies with FERPA. At the time, all of that sounded just blissful because FERPA used to be the ultimate litmus test of privacy. Well, again, as they always plot their timeline perfectly, in May of 2011, Arne Duncan circumvented Congress again and made a rule change to FERPA, allowing that very same language of FERPA. So there is no protection at a federal level, and we put it in our own Ohio code that it's permissible and legal. The third item on the Race to the Top that had to be accomplished was that you had to join a national assessment consortium. The Gates didn't finance this, actually the feds did, with $330 million of the stimulus funds. There was 2 consortia developed because they didn't want it to look like there was a national consortia. You had a choice, one or the other. We joined PARC in November of 11, before the deadline to join. Not only did we have this in our memorandum of understanding, which is supposedly a legal instrument and legally binding, PARC has the same legally binding instrument, and they reiterate many of the things that we promised in our Race to the Top application, which is we would adopt Common Core standards by December of 11, that we would implement this assessment system and have it completely operational by June of 2015, that we would agree with all other states on all issues, and we would change our state laws if necessary. If Utah decided that they wanted a certain thing in the national assessment, and the other states agreed with them, and Ohio was the only outlier, well, too bad, Ohio, change your law. There is no control. You have one seat at the table. Currently, that seat is taken by Dick Ross, our new state superintendent. And that we would adhere by all requirements, and as they changed as well. So then the question is, well, can't we just say no? We don't want to belong to PARC anymore. Well, per PARC's agreement, anyway, we cannot just say no. It is a legal binding document, and then you go through. You have to provide a written notice. You have to have the other states approve your departure, and then ultimately, the U.S. Department of Education will decide whether you're ever let out. So I think we did answer that one. So what did we give up in all of this? State control and local control, no doubt. I think maybe some people consider this local control, but to me the biggest infringement is at a personal liberty level, particularly parental authority. Parental authority has been missing for a long time. I personally don't believe we've had local control in 20-some years. Once there was a U.S. Department of Education and there was Title I funds coming into a school district, the feds on the state and the state on the local. It's a fallacy. Most of these boards go up to Columbus. They're told by the state school board association, which is very union-led, what they're supposed to do, and that they're supposed to make friends with their superintendents and do whatever superintendents need them to do. One of the other carrots, besides the possibility of winning funds from the feds in this competition, was you also garnered a No Child Left Behind waiver. This was really important to Ohio because we were not going to make the deadlines of compliance to No Child Left Behind. So the irony to me that they thought that that was a carrot and they were signing up for an exponentially bigger federal mandate than No Child Left Behind, but that seemed to be fall to the wayside, and this of course was going to be the answer to everybody's prayer and take care of all of that. When the waiver itself, since that was a congressionally administered law, No Child Left Behind is law on the federal books. So these waivers technically could not be issued without an act of Congress. Well, President Obama believed that since they weren't going to do it and they weren't able to do it, he would do it, and he did. Executive orders. So you say, well, if this is such a great program, a reasonable person would say, why do you have to have carrots and incentives to join? Why are you going to be punished if you don't? And why such a covert implementation? There's not a single person in Columbus that can answer those questions. Performance-based education. Again, there's a certain order to this. It's standards, which have been established, equals assessment, which drives your curriculum. There's no way around it. I don't know if this will play or not. Ann said that the speakers aren't up. Yep, okay. The link down there, because you will get that out of, it's monotonous in the repetition of every single person, every educrat, as I call them up in Columbus. These are standards. They are not curriculum, they're not going to generate curriculum. We are locally controlled. They do not have to adopt these standards nor any curriculum. Bill Gates in 2009, ironically, in front of the state legislators conference, in 1 minute and 10 seconds, goes through exactly what this is intended to do, and exactly that very thing. That the only way the standards are ever successful is if the curriculum isn't completely aligned with it, period. And that is the entire intent of this. The three, I would say, biggest untruths, at least that came out of a hearing last Tuesday in the Education Committee, is that this was state-led. All of this is voluntary. Nobody had to do this. Well, it wasn't state-led. That's why no state legislator knows what you're talking about when he asks about Common Core. There is a copyright that exists. The standards are owned by the National Governors Association, which is a trade organization, no different than the NEA. Now, you may have governors who belong to it. To claim that that makes it a state-led initiative is preposterous. As well as Joy Pullman of the Heartland Institute has found that 70 million federal dollars, tax dollars, were given to the NGA beyond their trade dues. So there is nothing that is state-led about the standards to begin with. The copyright is held, and they actually state in the copyright that no one can make claim to these besides us. And then they have the audacity, shortly below the copyright, to put a full disclaimer that they hold no they hold no claims to the validity or the strength of the standards, and if there's a failure, they are not responsible.
Lawyer talk.
Yes, and it's all in caps too. Local control. You know, that's been shoved down my throat by everyone I've spoken to. You know, Heidi, we are a local control state. What are you so upset about? It's like, really? Well, that's kind of like claiming we're a sovereign state too. It really only matters how you're operating. We haven't operated as a local control state for decades, in my opinion. If you go out to the ODE site, it's amazing what they have out there. It is in complete contradiction to every argument being made right now from their own departments. There's a school options table for Ohio because we do have different types of schools. But under the public schools, it's even labeled at the top that this is compulsory. And it tells you what your instruction design has to include. And it requires to comply with Ohio operating standards and minimum standards for curriculum. It's right there in their own tables. And through these dictates is how they're masquerading getting this in. My Forest Hills Local School District Board, our legislative aide, or I should say liaison, who has worked directly with Debbie Terhart, has argued with me that this is law and they have to do it. I said, well, it may be law, that the standards may be law, but it's not law you have to follow. He says, no, we do. Forest Hills has even put it in print in their 5-year strategic plan and appropriating funds to comply with this. But yet, when you ask Debbie Terhart in front of that same person, she'll say, they don't have to do it. It's one of those things that's mind-boggling. And they relied on the semantics so long that they're still doing it, not realizing how stupid they sound. In February of 2012, Stan Hoffman, who was the state superintendent at the time, presented to the Education Committee of the House and the Senate. The only place you will find the term Common Core is in the ODE. You won't find it uttered anywhere else. You won't find it in any legislation. You won't find it documented anywhere. If you find anything close called Ohio Core, that you're more than likely to find all of the synonyms, 21st century learning, college and career readiness skills. I mean, they purposely never use the term Common Core unless they're within their own little clique. This is missing the part that's important. I don't know why they didn't come over. This was slide number 23 of Mr. Hefner's presentation. And it defies everything that they are currently spewing in testimony that last Tuesday as well, which I find remarkable. The state transition timeline. This was given and is evidence of the fact that they are following the guidelines, meeting the memorandum of understanding, which includes complete implementation by 2014-15 school year. Phase 4 reads, complete transition and full implementation. And the first bullet point, implementation of local curriculum and instruction aligned to the Common Core. So this is their information. This is their presentation. And a little caveat, when I went to save this file when I found it, it saves as Fordham. So Mr. Hefner didn't even produce it. The Fordham Institute did. Oh, that's why. I'm sorry. Okay. I'm not real. Okay. That was the timeline, and that's what I just read to you. The second bullet point being that the national assessments have to be up and running and fully operational by June of 2015, and that accountability, this is where the teachers come in, the accountability is used based on, the assessment is used for the accountability of the teachers, which now under Common Core, teachers will be assessed 50% of their evaluation based on the kids' performance. And they have nothing to do with the test, and they have no input on it. The second item, but the second falsehood, student data is protected. I even was showing our vice chairman of the Education Committee after testimony last week the lie that was given in testimony, that this data is protected. I showed him the Ohio Revised Code, the exact language, which is that it is identifiable by our own code, even without FERPA. His remark to me was, that's not what we're going to use it for, though. This is a Republican. So this is what we're dealing with. And my remark to him is, I don't care what you're doing with it. This should never exist. And your job is to protect this. You don't work for this ODE. You don't work for Batchelor. You work to protect my liberties. Go read your state constitution. They don't get it. Beyond the fact that our own revised code allows it, FERPA, as I explained, has been shot holes in that. And it basically reads just like our House Bill 290 does. But then to add insult to injury, the Parker Memorandum of Understanding requires us to share any and all information to Park that is collected, and Park's agreement with the U.S. Department of Education requires them to share it with them. So it doesn't really matter when they tell you, well, we're not going to send that to the feds. No, you're not. But the Park will do it for you, and we're required to give it to Park. So in the essence of when you get beyond the politics and the Ohio Revised Code, it kind of comes down to who do our kids belong to? And that has come up in the news in the last few weeks. You know, no, they belong to the collective. They belong to the community. No, they don't. You know, it gets said around in this room a lot, you own yourself. And we have been spent the last 3 years defending the self-evident. And it's as I put it to them, I'm tired of fighting the progressive Republicans who are putting in policy. I'm too tired to go even across the aisle and beat on the Dems. This is Republican. Kasich could have done exactly what Bob McDonnell did when he arrived in Virginia and was sworn in 2011, which is, why would I want this? And out it went. Kasich embraced it, and so did Debbie Terhart. This is kind of a good example of I'm sorry, of what's going on with Gates. All of the players, everybody that's benefiting, and when you read through, there's a number, and they're federally produced documents. And the lingo now, the lexicon includes human capital, managed workforce, and it's very dehumanizing language. And what they're attempting to do, and quite honestly, they're pretty close to pulling it off, is making children just a member of the state. And everything they need will come from the state, and everything they produce will go back to it. I don't know how many of you were around in 2009 when we were fighting Obama care, but this is a flow chart of just the Race to the Top application competition. And just like, as soon as I saw it, I thought, this looks like the Affordable Care flow chart. And as well, so you get to see all the people that are benefiting, all the money trail recipients. And just like the Obamacare flow chart, which you couldn't find the word patient on, the word student is nowhere to be found. Everybody's getting money except the student. So who's running our schools? Quite honestly, special interest, philanthropy, and the feds. This is becoming a bigger discussion point in the Common Core fight in Columbus, thank goodness. We have no idea what this is going to cost. Besides the fact that the standards have never been tested, there was no field testing, there's no proven outcome from the standards, no one has done a cost projection on a state level or even on a federal level for Common Core, implementation or sustainability. So that has caught the attention of our finance chair in the House, thank goodness, and our treasurer. The other thing that which is reminiscent of the Medicaid expansion argument, anytime that we mandate something and there's no one to pay for it, where do we look? The state looks from Columbus to the Potomac. It just creates a bigger dependency, which is exactly what the feds want. So the question that I've been getting back is, what do you want? I want choice in education, I want my personal liberties back, and I want them protected. Right now, the immediate fight is in the Education Committee in the House. Chairman Stubbleton is all in for Common Core. A Republican, chair of the Education Committee. If you go, unfortunately, the House is much friendlier than the Senate. The Senate has Peggy Lehner as the education chair, and she is like this with the Ohio Business Roundtable. She even has done shield for them with this 10,000 Moms United, which is a front group sponsored by the Ohio Business Roundtable. She really is, she is public enemy one as far as Common Core goes, in my book. Since John Houston is now no longer a legislator, but he would be otherwise. But we've got our attention in the House because that's definitely the place to start. We have a couple of friends on the Education Committee, fortunately some legislators, and a couple in particular that were already looking into this, thank goodness. When we had the forums in April to launch this statewide effort, it really woke some people up. And it actually got national attention because so many states had already been starting to fight this. And they still hadn't even been able to find somebody, a legislator, to carry legislation for them. And we turned out over 1,000 people in 3 cities in the course of 24 hours practically. And by Wednesday, we had affected the state budget. Now granted, it was confusing because Park wasn't funded directly in the budget because they were trying to legislate Park in through the budget. But they actually did modify, write an amendment, and Ron Unstedt is the one that carried that for us. So he's to be applauded for that. And I guess I say all that to say, when you have a state like Indiana, who was able to finally get legislation passed, not what they wanted as a full pullback, but they got the pause through, and hopefully, since this cannot be defended, hopefully giving something a review period will cause it to resolve itself. But Heather Crossan, who was me in Indiana, started this same thing at her kitchen table after just being blown away by what this was really about. She was one of our panelists. I don't know if any of you were able to attend the forums, but she was one of our panelists, and she was absolutely blown away at the energy, at the turnout. Emmett McGordy, who is the leading expert on Common Core across the country, he has testified in every state that has active legislation. He said those were all record-setting forums for them. They typically go to 25, 50 people, which to us is like nothing. That's a low-grade Tea Party group. And so we have really caught their attention because of our momentum. And they really believe that Ohio may be able to be the first state to actually have complete pull-out legislation. No compromise. They said if anybody can do it after all the states we've been in, it's Ohio, because you guys have the grassroots energy. And so again, coming back to your point, it doesn't take 80%. Quite honestly, the revolution started and was won by about 17.5%. So you just have to believe in what you're doing, believe you can make a difference, and believe, quite honestly, that you don't have a choice. I don't know how this ends, but I do know I'm going to fight this with every breath I have. So.
Right now, the Obama administration is attempting to support the German family who's here because they want to homeschool their children. Germany has a system like this for the state, standard, whatever else. Do you think that is an attempt to set legal precedents to break down homeschooling?
Most definitely. I mean, especially in contrast, we have Boston